The autumn wind cut through Silver Creek like a blade, carrying the scent of hay and diesel fuel across the livestock auction grounds. Elena Sawyer stood at the edge of the crowd, her worn boots planted firmly in the mud, watching the auctioneer's gavel fall again and again. Each strike was a small hammer blow to her hope. She had exactly $3,000 left to her name, the last remnant of her father's estate after the bank had seized everything else. Lot 33, sold to Miller Ranch for $8,000. The auctioneer's voice crackled through the speakers. Elena's fingers tightened around the bidding paddle in her coat pocket. Around her, ranchers in clean Stetsons and expensive boots laughed and talked business. She recognized most of them. Men who had watched her father build the Sawyer Ranch from nothing, who had respected Ray Sawyer's gift with horses, and who now looked at her with a mixture of pity and disdain. A 25-year-old woman with no husband, no prospects, and a ranch drowning in debt was not worth their time. Lot 34. The auctioneer's assistant led a chestnut horse into the ring, and the crowd's laughter turned cruel. The animal was a disaster. His ribs showed through a dull coat marred by scars and patches of missing hair. His head hung low, ears pinned back, and he limped heavily on his right foreleg. Fresh cuts crossed his flanks, and his eyes, those dark, liquid eyes, seemed to hold something Elena couldn't quite name. Not fear, not pain, something deeper. Now, folks, I know what you're thinking, the auctioneer said with a forced chuckle. But this gelding's got good bones under all that rough living. Start the bidding at 500. Silence. 200. More silence. Someone near the back made a joke about the glue factory. Elena felt something twist in her chest. She'd seen abused horses before. Her father had taken in more than a few over the years, but this was different. The way the horse stood, despite his injuries, there was a strange dignity to him. And those eyes. They swept across the crowd with what looked like calculation, assessment, as if the horse were judging them rather than the other way around. $100, the auctioneer said flatly. Come on, someone give me 100. Elena's hand moved before her mind could catch up. She pulled out her paddle and raised it. The auctioneer's gavel paused mid-swing. We have 100. Do I hear 150? The crowd turned to look at her. She felt their stares like physical weight. Tom Bradford, who owned the spread next to hers, shook his head slowly. Elena, honey, that animal's not worth the bullet to put him down. She didn't lower her paddle. Going once, going twice. The gavel fell. Sold to Elena Sawyer for $100. As she moved to claim her purchase, she heard the whispers start. Poor girl's lost her mind, just like her daddy. Spending money she don't have on a horse that won't last the week. Ray would be ashamed. Elena ignored them all. She approached the holding pen where the horse stood, and for the first time, those dark eyes focused directly on her. Something passed between them, recognition, perhaps, or understanding. The horse didn't flinch when she reached out her hand, didn't shy away from her touch. Instead, he leaned his scarred head into her palm, and Elena felt a strange certainty settle over her. You're coming home with me, she whispered. She was loading him into her battered trailer when the black Mercedes pulled up. James Sterling stepped out like a king surveying his domain. Even in his 50s, he cut an impressive figure. Tall, silver-haired, wearing a suit that cost more than Elena's truck. He owned half the county, including the processing plant, 2 equipment dealerships, and thousands of acres of prime grazing land. He'd made offers on the Sawyer Ranch 3 times in the past year, each one more aggressive than the last. Elena, his smile didn't reach his eyes. I couldn't help but notice your purchase. Mr. Sterling. She continued securing the trailer latch. That's an interesting animal you've acquired. Lot 34, wasn't it? He moved closer, and 2 men in dark suits flanked him. Not cowboys. These men had the bearing of private security. I'd like to make you an offer. He's not for sale. I'm prepared to pay $10,000. Sterling pulled out a checkbook. Cash, if you prefer. That would go a long way towards saving your ranch, wouldn't it? Elena's hand stilled. $10,000 for a horse she'd bought for 100? The number was absurd, impossible, and deeply wrong. She turned to face him fully. Why? I collect unusual animals. Call it a hobby. His pen hovered over the check. 15,000. Final offer. The horse, she hadn't even named him yet, shifted in the trailer. His ears pricked forward, focused entirely on Sterling. The tension in his body was visible, every muscle coiled tight. Elena had seen that stance before, in horses about to bolt or fight. But this was controlled, purposeful. The horse was watching Sterling the way a wolf watches a hunter. No, Elena said. He's not for sale at any price. Something flickered across Sterling's face. Anger, quickly masked. That's unfortunate. I should mention that horse may have come from my property originally. If I find proof of theft, I'll be contacting Sheriff Miller. You have a bill of sale saying otherwise, Elena replied, her voice steady despite the fear creeping up her spine. Now if you'll excuse me, I need to get him home. She climbed into her truck before Sterling could respond, but she watched him in the side mirror as she pulled away. He stood there in the parking lot, phone pressed to his ear, his face set in hard lines. The two security men were already moving toward their own vehicle. Elena's hands shook on the steering wheel. $15,000. For a broken-down horse with scars and a limp. Something was very, very wrong. The drive back to Sawyer Ranch took 40 minutes along winding mountain roads. Elena kept checking her mirrors, half expecting to see Sterling's Mercedes following. But the road remained empty except for the autumn leaves tumbling across the asphalt. The horse rode quietly in the trailer, without the usual sounds of distress or movement. Too quietly, Elena thought. The ranch appeared around the final bend. Weathered buildings clustered in a valley between pine-covered hills. The main house needed paint, the barn roof wanted repairs, and the fences sagged in places, but it was home. It was all she had left of her father. She backed the trailer up to the barn and opened the gate slowly, speaking in the low, calm voice her father had taught her to use with frightened animals. Easy now. Let's get you settled. The horse descended the ramp with careful precision, favoring his injured leg, but moving with surprising grace. In the better light of the barn, Elena could see more details. The scars weren't random. Some formed straight lines, too precise to be accidental. Others looked like injection sites. What had been done to this animal? She led him to the largest stall, freshly bedded with straw. As soon as she removed the lead rope, the horse did something that made her freeze. He walked directly to the water bucket, drank exactly half, then moved to the far corner of the stall and urinated in the drainage grate. Not against the wall like most horses would. Not in the clean straw. He used the drain. What the hell? Elena whispered. The horse looked at her, and again she felt that uncanny sense of being assessed. Evaluated. He turned in a perfect circle, checking his space, she realized, then lowered himself carefully to the straw, protecting his injured leg. Elena backed out of the stall slowly. She'd been around horses her entire life. Her father had trained some of the best cutting horses in Montana, had a reputation for understanding equine behavior that bordered on mystical. But she'd never seen a horse act like this. House-trained, deliberate, almost human in its intelligence. She needed answers. The ranch office was in the back of the barn, a small room that had been her father's sanctuary. She hadn't been able to bring herself to clean it out yet. His coffee mug still sat on the desk, his jacket still hung on the back of the door. The accident, the official ruling had been an accident, happened 6 months ago. Ray Sawyer, expert horseman, had supposedly spooked his own mount and been thrown into a ravine. The explanation had never sat right with Elena, but the sheriff's investigation had been perfunctory at best. She sat in her father's chair and opened the desk drawers, searching for she didn't know what. Files on training techniques. Veterinary records. Nothing unusual. She was about to give up when her hand brushed against something odd, a slight gap between the drawer bottom and the actual base. False bottom. Her heart hammering, Elena pried it up. Underneath lay a leather-bound journal, a USB drive, and a folded map marked with her father's handwriting. The journal fell open to entries from 2 years ago. April 15th. Saw something at Sterling's North facility today. Brought my mare in for breeding to his stud, but the operation is bigger than he claims. Security everywhere. Cameras. Men with guns, not ranch hands. Heard horses screaming from the back buildings, the kind of sound that gets into your bones. Something's not right. May 3rd, did some digging. Sterling's company, Apex Biosolutions, holds patents for livestock enhancement protocols. What the hell does that mean? Found a purchase order for medical equipment, centrifuges, genetic sequencers, cryostorage. This isn't a ranch. It's a laboratory. June 22nd, met with a woman named Dr. Rachel Chun. She's a geneticist, worked for Apex until 3 months ago. She's terrified. Told me Sterling is running illegal trials on horses. Gene editing. Enhanced muscle development. Accelerated healing. Neurological augmentation. She said the goal is to create superior specimens for high-stakes endurance racing. Underground competitions where people bet millions. Most test subjects die. The ones that survive are changed. She has evidence. We're meeting next week to plan how to take it to the feds. June 29th, Dr. Chun is dead. Car accident, they said. Brake failure. I don't believe it. I'm copying everything to a backup drive. If anything happens to me, Elena needs to know. Sterling has to be stopped. The entries ended there, 2 months before her father's death. Elena's hands trembled as she turned the pages. There were more notes, diagrams of Sterling's property, license plate numbers, photographs of horses with strange markings and unusual muscle development. And at the very back, a list of lot numbers from various livestock auctions, with notes beside each. Lot 17, deceased, cardiac failure. Lot 23, reclaimed by Apex. Lot 28, unknown. Lot 34, Project Wildfire, primary asset. Lot 34, the horse in her barn. Elena grabbed the USB drive and plugged it into the ancient computer on her father's desk. It took several minutes to boot up, but finally, files appeared. Video footage, documents, and one audio file labeled Final Evidence. She clicked it. Her father's voice filled the small office. This is Ray Sawyer, dated August 10th. If you're listening to this, I'm probably dead, and it wasn't an accident. James Sterling is running an illegal genetic modification program on horses at his facility north of Silver Creek. He's creating enhanced animals for underground endurance races, death matches, really. The horses are pushed until they collapse. Winners take millions in bets. The operation is funded by wealthy buyers from overseas who want the genetics for military applications. There was a pause, the sound of papers shuffling. I have proof. Videos, financial records, testimony from Dr. Rachel Chun before her death. But I need time to get it to the right people. Federal prosecutor Marcus Webb in Helena is willing to listen, but I have to be careful. Sterling has Sheriff Miller in his pocket, probably half the county officials too. If this goes wrong, if I don't make it, there's one thing you need to know, Elena. Her father's voice cracked slightly. Project Wildfire is special. It's their crown achievement. A stallion with near-human intelligence, regenerative abilities that shouldn't be possible, and stamina that makes normal horses look fragile. Sterling's planning to sell him to the highest bidder, probably foreign military. But the horse escaped 3 weeks ago. They're desperate to get him back. If you find him, protect him. He's evidence. And maybe he deserves a chance at the life we give all creatures, freedom and respect. The recording ended. Elena sat in the darkness, her father's words echoing in her mind. Project Wildfire. The primary asset. The horse she'd just bought for $100 was the crown jewel of Sterling's illegal operation. And Sterling knew exactly where he was. She bolted from the office and ran to the stall. The horse, Prometheus, she decided suddenly, the name fitting somehow, lifted his head at her approach. In the dim light, his eyes seemed to glow with an intelligence that shouldn't exist. You understand me, don't you? Elena whispered. Prometheus rose to his feet, still favoring the injured leg, and walked to the stall door. He pressed his nose against her outstretched hand, and she felt the warmth of his breath. Then he did something that made her breath catch. He nodded. It wasn't the head toss of a restless horse or the automatic response to a voice command. It was a clear, deliberate, human gesture of affirmation. Dear God, Elena breathed. What did they do to you? The sound of vehicles approaching made them both freeze. Through the barn's open door, Elena saw headlights sweeping across the yard, 2 trucks, moving fast. She ran to the window, and her blood went cold. Sheriff Miller's cruiser led the convoy, followed by a black SUV with tinted windows. Sterling's vehicle. They were coming for Prometheus. And they were coming now. Elena's mind raced as the vehicles rolled to a stop in her yard. She had minutes, maybe less. The journal, the USB drive. She shoved them into her jacket pockets. Evidence her father had died protecting. Evidence that might be the only thing keeping her alive now. Sheriff Miller emerged from his cruiser, a man in his 40s whose gut hung over his belt, and whose smile had always been too quick, too practiced. Behind him, For men in tactical gear stepped out of the SUV. Not deputies. Private security, heavily armed. Elena forced herself to walk calmly from the barn to meet them. Running would only confirm their suspicions. "Sheriff Miller," she called out. "Little late for a social call, isn't it?" Miller's smile was apologetic, but his eyes were cold. "Sorry about this, Elena. Got a report of stolen property on your premises. Need to take a look in your barn. You have a warrant?" He pulled a folded paper from his pocket. "Right here. Complaint filed by Apex Biosolutions regarding a chestnut stallion. Registration number ASX 034. They have documentation proving ownership." "That's impossible. I bought him at a legal auction with a clear bill of sale." "Then there's been some kind of mistake," Miller said smoothly. "Won't take but a minute to sort out. Why don't you show us the horse?" The tactical team was already spreading out, surrounding the barn. Elena recognized the formation. They weren't here to verify ownership. They were here to contain and extract. "The horse is injured and aggressive," Elena said, playing for time. "You can't just—" The sound of another vehicle interrupted her. An old pickup truck turned into her drive, and Elena felt a surge of relief. Dr. Ben Mason climbed out, his weathered face creased with concern. At 65, he'd been the county veterinarian for over 30 years and her father's closest friend. "Evening, Sheriff," Mason said calmly, his medical bag in hand. "Got Elena's call about an injured horse. Thought I'd come by to take a look." Miller's jaw tightened. "This is official business. Document." "So is animal welfare," Mason replied. "You planning to transport an injured animal without veterinary clearance? That's a state violation, Sheriff. ASPCA would have a field day." The two men stared at each other, and Elena saw the calculation in Miller's eyes. Mason was respected, connected, and most importantly, not on Sterling's payroll. Having him here complicated things. "Fine," Miller said finally. "You check the horse, verify the ID chip number. Should match the registration." Mason nodded and walked toward the barn, gesturing for Elena to follow. As soon as they were out of earshot, he leaned close. "Your father called me 2 days before he died," Mason whispered. "Said if anything happened to him, I should look after you. He also said there might come a day when you'd need to run. Is today that day?" Elena's throat tightened. "He left me a journal. Evidence about Sterling's operation." "Then we're out of time." Mason's expression hardened. "I'm going to scan this horse, and I guarantee we're going to find a tracking chip. Military grade, probably. I'll need to remove it if you want any chance of getting out of here." They entered the barn, and Mason went straight to Prometheus's stall. The horse watched him approach with that same eerie intelligence, but didn't shy away when Mason ran his hands over the scarred flanks. "Sweet Mary and Joseph," the veterinarian breathed. "The muscle development, this isn't natural. This is engineered." He pulled a handheld scanner from his bag and ran it over Prometheus's body. The device beeped urgently near the left shoulder. Mason frowned, moved the scanner, tried again. The beeping intensified. "It's deep," he muttered. "Embedded in the muscle tissue. This isn't a standard livestock chip. This is GPS tracking, real-time monitoring. They know exactly where he is, probably down to the meter. Can you remove it?" Mason's eyes met hers. "Yes, but it'll hurt like hell, even for a horse with his pain tolerance. And it'll take at least 15 minutes. Can you buy me that time?" Elena looked back toward the barn entrance, where shadows moved in the darkness. The tactical team positioning themselves. "I'll try." Mason was already prepping his instruments. "Talk to me while I work. Tell me what you know." As Mason injected local anesthetic and began the delicate work of extracting the chip, Elena recounted everything. The journal, the recordings, Project Wildfire, her father's murder disguised as an accident. Prometheus stood absolutely still, his only reaction an occasional flicker of his ears. The level of control was inhuman. Unnatural. "Your father was right to be afraid," Mason said, his hands steady despite the urgency. "Sterling's operation goes beyond illegal racing. I've heard whispers, foreign military contracts, genetic patents worth hundreds of millions. If Prometheus here is their proof of concept." He shook his head. "They'll kill to keep this quiet. They already have." "Elena," Sheriff Miller's voice echoed through the barn. "Time's up. We're coming in." "Almost there," Mason muttered, his fingers working quickly. Blood stained Prometheus's coat as he extracted a small metallic cylinder. "Got it." He dropped the chip into a bucket of water, just as Miller and two tactical operatives entered the barn. Elena stepped out of the stall, positioning herself between them and Prometheus. Scan confirms the chip number matches Apex's registration, Mason announced. However, the animal shows signs of severe abuse and neglect. I'm placing him under veterinary hold pending a full health assessment. State Law, Section 47-2B. Miller's face flushed. That's not. You want to argue animal welfare law with me, Sheriff? Mason's voice took on steel. Call Judge Henderson right now. Let's see who she sides with. Before Miller could respond, one of the tactical operator's radios crackled. Signals moving. The asset is on the move, heading south from the barn. Elena understood immediately. The chip in the water bucket, picked up by the stream that ran through her property. The stream that flowed towards Sterling's land. He's escaping, the operator shouted, and chaos erupted. Miller and 3 of his men bolted from the barn, following the false signal. Only one tactical operative remained, and Elena saw his finger move toward his radio to report the trick. Prometheus moved first. The stall door, which Elena could have sworn was latched, swung open with a crash. 800 pounds of engineered muscle and fury exploded forward. The operative barely had time to raise his weapon before Prometheus slammed into him, knocking him across the barn. The man's head cracked against a support beam, and he crumpled, unconscious. Elena stared in shock. The horse had opened his own stall, had timed the attack perfectly, and now stood over the fallen man with ears pinned back, ready to strike again if needed. We have to go, Mason said urgently. Now, before they realize their mistake. I can't just leave my ranch. Your father died protecting this evidence. Don't let that be for nothing. Mason was already throwing his saddle on Prometheus. I know someone who can help. Caroline Vance. She runs trail expeditions in the Rockies. She'll know how to get you to safety. Where is she? About 40 miles north. Old logging camp near Dead Man's Pass. Mason tightened the girth with practiced efficiency. I'll send her a message, but you need to leave now. Take the fire road through the timber. It'll buy you time before they can track you. Elena grabbed her father's saddlebags and began stuffing them with supplies, water, first aid, the journal, the USB drive. Her hands moved automatically while her mind tried to process the impossibility of the situation. She was about to flee her home, chased by corrupt lawmen and armed mercenaries, riding a genetically modified horse that could apparently think like a human. What about you? She asked Mason. I'll slow them down. Tell them you overpowered me, stole the horse. He smiled grimly. Won't be the first time I've lied to Jim Sterling. A shout from outside. They'd realized the trick with the chip. Time was up. Elena swung into the saddle, and Prometheus danced beneath her, ready to run. She looked down at Mason, this man who'd known her since birth, who'd been at every birthday party and helped her father through every crisis. Thank you, she whispered. Your father was the best man I ever knew, Mason replied. Don't let them win, Elena. Don't let them bury the truth with him. Then she was moving, Prometheus bursting from the barn like he'd been shot from a cannon. The injured leg showed no sign of weakness now. Whatever the anesthetic had done, or whatever genetic enhancements flowed through his blood, he ran like a creature built for nothing else. Behind her, she heard shouts, the roar of engines. Headlights swept across the yard as Sterling's men realized what was happening. But Prometheus had already reached the tree line, and Elena leaned low over his neck as branches whipped past in the darkness. The fire road was barely visible, just 2 ruts through the pine forest that her father had maintained for emergencies. Prometheus navigated it with impossible precision, never stumbling, adjusting his stride for obstacles Elena couldn't even see in the gloom. His breathing was steady, powerful, showing none of the strain that should come from such a sprint. They'd been riding for 20 minutes when Elena heard the helicopter. The sound started as a distant thrum, then grew rapidly louder. Searchlights stabbed through the canopy, turning night into fractured day. Sterling had called in serious resources. Elena urged Prometheus off the fire road and into deeper cover, but the helicopter stayed with them. They'd switched to thermal imaging, she realized. They could track body heat, even through the trees. Prometheus suddenly changed direction, plunging down a steep embankment toward a creek bed. Elena grabbed the saddle horn as the world tilted, trusting the horse's instincts. They hit the water with a splash, and Prometheus immediately turned upstream, running through the icy current. masking their heat signature. The horse was running through freezing water to evade thermal tracking. How the hell do you know to do that? Elena gasped. Prometheus couldn't answer, but his ears flicked back, acknowledging her voice. They stayed in the creek for nearly a mile, the water reaching Prometheus's chest at the deepest points, before he climbed out on the far bank and resumed his ground-eating lope. The helicopter had fallen behind, but Elena knew it was temporary. They'd recalibrate, expand their search grid. She and Prometheus couldn't outrun technology indefinitely. They needed help. The logging camp appeared as the first gray light of dawn touched the eastern sky. A cluster of weathered cabins surrounded a central clearing, abandoned years ago when the timber industry moved on. But smoke rose from one chimney, and two horses stood in a makeshift corral. Caroline Vance emerged from the main cabin as Elena rode in. She was a lean woman in her 40s, with silver threading through her dark hair and eyes that missed nothing. She'd been a forest ranger for 15 years before transitioning to private guide work, and she carried herself with the confidence of someone who'd survived grisly encounters and winter storms. Ben Mason sent word, Caroline said without preamble. Said you'd be coming in hot with trouble behind you. Her gaze moved to Prometheus, and her expression shifted to something between awe and disbelief. That's the Sterling horse. The one from the rumors. You know about Sterling's operation? Everyone in the backcountry knows something's wrong at his north facility. Sounds in the night. Horses screaming. But nobody talks about it because Sterling owns the sheriff and most of the county commissioners. Caroline approached Prometheus cautiously. The horse allowed her inspection, standing perfectly still. Lord above, the muscle structure, the way he's watching us. This is real, isn't it? The genetic modification. My father documented everything. Sterling's running death races with enhanced horses. Prometheus, that's what I named him, is their primary asset. Worth millions, maybe more if sold to foreign military. And they want him back. Caroline stated it as fact, not a question. How far behind are they? Helicopter was tracking us. I don't know how much time we bought. Caroline made a decision. I've got supplies packed already. Ben said you'd need to reach the Federal Ranger Station at Summit Peak. It's got the only hardline communication system that Sterling can't jam or intercept. But it's a 3-day ride through some of the worst terrain in Montana. Can we make it? In normal circumstances? Maybe. With Sterling's people hunting you. Caroline shook her head. The routes through the mountains. There's Dead Man's Pass, which is suicide on a good day. There's the river crossing at Cascade Rapids, which you can't attempt until the water drops. And there's about 100 miles of wilderness where anything could happen. So what do we do? Caroline looked at Prometheus, then back at Elena. We split up. I'll take Bolt and create a diversion, lead them south toward the lower valleys. You and Prometheus head north through Dead Man's Pass. It's narrow, they can't follow with vehicles or the helicopter effectively. If you can get through, you'll have a straight shot to Summit Peak. That's suicide. For a normal horse and rider, yes. Caroline's smile was grim. But that animal isn't normal, and you're Ray Sawyer's daughter. Your father could ride trails that would make other men weep. He taught you everything he knew. Trust it. Trust him. The sound of engines in the distance made them all freeze. They were out of time. Take these, Caroline said, handing Elena a satellite phone and a pistol. Phone might work at higher elevations, though Sterling's probably jamming local frequencies. Guns for emergencies. And this, she pulled out a laminated map marked with notations. Dead Man's Pass, the safe paths through the rapids, everything you need to reach Summit Peak. Your father helped me map these routes years ago. Elena stared at the map, recognizing her father's handwriting in the margins. He'd planned for this. Somehow, he'd known she might need to run someday. Elena, Caroline said seriously, Dead Man's Pass has killed people. It's a ledge trail along a cliff face, barely 3 feet wide in places, with a 1,000-foot drop. You'll be exposed. One wrong step. I understand. Do you? Because if that horse panics, if he loses his footing, you're both going over. There's no second chances up there. Elena looked at Prometheus. The horse met her gaze with those impossibly intelligent eyes, and she felt a certainty settle over her. Whatever Sterling had done to him, whatever genetic abomination he represented, in this moment, he was her partner. They would survive together or not at all. We're ready, she said. Caroline nodded, accepting the decision. She swung onto her own horse, a tough black quarter horse named Bolt. I'll give you a 30-minute head start, then make enough noise to wake the dead. Get moving. Elena mounted Prometheus, settling into the saddle. The horse immediately turned north, toward the mountains looming in the distance, their peaks still white with early snow. Dead Man's Pass waited somewhere up there, a ribbon of rock between earth and sky. Thank you, Elena called back to Caroline. Don't thank me yet. Just live. Caroline's voice followed her into the trees. And tell the truth when you get there. Make sure everyone knows what Sterling did, what he took from us. Then Elena was alone with Prometheus, riding into the wilderness as the sun climbed higher and the sounds of pursuit grew closer behind them. The first hours were deceptively peaceful. Prometheus moved through the forest like he was born to it, his enhanced senses guiding them around obstacles and choosing paths that minimized their visibility. Elena had ridden her entire life, but this was different. The horse anticipated terrain before they reached it, adjusted his gait for optimal efficiency, and seemed to understand the concept of pursuit in ways that transcended animal instinct. Around noon, she heard the explosion. It came from the south, a deep boom that echoed off the mountain walls, followed by the distant crackle of gunfire. Caroline's diversion. Elena forced herself not to look back, trusting that the experienced guide knew how to survive in these mountains. Prometheus's ears swiveled toward the sound, but he didn't slow. If anything, he increased his pace, as if understanding that Caroline's sacrifice bought them time they couldn't waste. The terrain grew steeper as they climbed. Pine forest gave way to aspen groves, their leaves golden in the autumn sun, then to rocky slopes where only scrub brush clung to existence. The air thinned, making each breath a conscious effort. But Prometheus showed no signs of fatigue. His breathing remained steady, his stride powerful and sure. Elena checked Caroline's map as they rode. Dead Man's Pass was still hours away, a route that wouldn't begin until they crossed Widow's Creek and ascended the north face of Cathedral Mountain. But between here and there lay miles of exposed ridgeline, terrain where a helicopter could easily spot them. As if summoned by her thoughts, she heard the distant thrum of rotors. Come on, boy, Elena urged, leaning low over Prometheus's neck. We need cover. The horse needed no encouragement. He surged forward, climbing at an angle that would have exhausted a normal mount within minutes. Elena spotted an overhang ahead, a shelf of rock that jutted out from the mountainside, and Prometheus made straight for it without direction. They pressed against the cliff face just as the helicopter crested the ridge behind them. Elena held her breath, watching through a gap in the rocks as the aircraft circled. The pilot was good, systematic, sweeping across the terrain in a grid pattern. Prometheus stood absolutely still. No stamping, no head tossing, nothing to draw attention. Even his breathing seemed controlled, quieter. Elena marveled at the level of discipline, or was it intelligence? How much human awareness did Sterling's genetic modifications grant? The helicopter hovered for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, then moved on, following the more obvious trail south. They'd bought more time, but Elena knew their luck couldn't hold forever. She pulled out Caroline's map again, studying the route ahead. There was another option, a game trail that cut through a canyon, saving several hours but requiring them to ford Widow's Creek at its deepest point. The map showed the ford marked in red with her father's handwriting, only in low water. Current too strong otherwise. Lost a horse here in '09. Elena looked at the sky. No rain for days. The creek should be manageable. What do you think? She asked Prometheus. Can you handle a river crossing? The horse turned his head, those dark eyes meeting hers, and she could have sworn she saw understanding there. Decision-making. Then he started forward, choosing the path toward the canyon without her guidance. That's either incredible intelligence or I'm losing my mind, Elena muttered. Widow's Creek roared in the distance long before they reached it. Elena's confidence wavered as they emerged from the canyon and saw the water. What should have been a modest stream was a churning torrent, swollen from snowmelt in the high peaks. The ford her father had marked was barely visible, just a line of partially submerged rocks where the water ran slightly less deep. Okay, Elena said, mostly to herself. We can turn back. Find another route. Prometheus walked to the water's edge and stopped, assessing. Elena felt his muscles bunch beneath her, felt the calculation happening in whatever hybrid brain Sterling's scientists had created. The horse was measuring the current, the depth, the distance to the far bank. Then he stepped into the water. Wait! Elena gasped, but Prometheus was already committed. The current hit them like a physical blow. Icy water surged around Prometheus's legs, rising rapidly to his chest, threatening to sweep them downstream. But the horse adjusted his stance, widening his base, using his enhanced strength to maintain position. He took another step, then another, feeling carefully for solid footing. Elena's heart hammered in her chest. They were a quarter of the way across, and the water was already trying to drag them toward the rapids downstream. Prometheus's breathing changed, harder now, labored, as he fought both the current and the need to keep Elena above water. Halfway across, his hoof slipped. For a terrible moment, they tilted, the current catching them. Elena grabbed the saddle horn with one hand and Prometheus's mane with the other as the horse scrambled for purchase. Water poured over them, shockingly cold, stealing Elena's breath. But Prometheus didn't fall. Whatever genetic enhancements he possessed, they included the strength and balance to recover. He found solid rock beneath his hooves and pushed forward, muscles straining, making each step a battle against nature itself. The far bank seemed impossibly distant, but inch by inch, Prometheus forced his way across. By the time they reached the shallows, both horse and rider were shaking with cold and adrenaline. Elena slid from the saddle, her legs barely supporting her, and checked Prometheus for injuries. Nothing, not even a scrape. The horse that should have been exhausted, possibly injured, stood waiting for her to remount with nothing more than slightly elevated breathing. "You're not real," Elena whispered, running her hands over his coat. "You can't be real." Prometheus lowered his head and gently butted her shoulder, a gesture of reassurance that was so human it made Elena's throat tighten. Then they heard the sound that made both of them freeze. Dogs barking in the distance. Tracking hounds, and they were getting closer. Sterling's team had adapted quickly. Without the helicopter to guide them, they deployed dogs, probably bloodhounds or similar breeds capable of following a scent trail for miles. And now the river crossing that should have bought Elena time had instead left them exposed on an open slope with nowhere to hide. "We need altitude," Elena said, consulting the map. Dead Man's Pass was still 3 miles ahead, but there was no time for subtlety now. "Can you run?" Prometheus's answer was to surge forward, and Elena barely got back in the saddle before they were moving. The horse climbed at a pace that defied physics, his powerful hindquarters driving them up slopes where normal horses would have to pick their way carefully. Behind them, the barking grew louder. The pass appeared as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon. Elena had seen photographs, heard the stories, but nothing prepared her for the reality. The trail, if it could even be called that, was a narrow shelf carved into the cliff face, barely wide enough for a horse and rider. To the right, the mountain rose vertically. To the left, a sheer drop of 1,000 feet to the rocks below, and it went on for nearly 2 miles. "Sweet Jesus," Elena breathed. Prometheus paused at the entrance to the pass, and Elena felt his hesitation. Not fear. The horse seemed incapable of fear in the conventional sense, but assessment. Calculation of risk versus necessity. The dogs appeared on the ridge behind them, at least 6 handlers with them, and Elena spotted the glint of rifles in the fading light. She and Prometheus were exposed, silhouetted against the sky. "We don't have a choice," Elena said quietly. "It's the pass or surrender." Prometheus made his decision. He stepped onto the ledge. The first 100 yards were the worst. Elena forced herself to look straight ahead, not down at the drop that could kill them both. Prometheus placed each hoof with deliberate care, testing the rock before committing his weight. The trail was crumbling in places, barely 3 feet wide, and the mountain wind pulled at them with invisible hands. A rifle shot cracked across the distance. The bullet struck rock inches from Prometheus's head, sending up a spray of stone fragments. The horse didn't flinch, didn't bolt. He pressed himself against the cliff wall and kept moving. Elena heard herself making small sounds of terror as more shots followed, but Prometheus remained focused, navigating the impossible trail with concentration that bordered on supernatural. They reached a slightly wider section, maybe 4 feet across, and Elena risked a glance back. The handlers had reached the pass entrance, but they'd stopped. Even Sterling's men weren't crazy enough to follow on foot, but they could shoot. Another volley of bullets peppered the cliff face around them. One caught Prometheus's left haunch, drawing blood. The horse's muscles tensed, but he didn't panic, didn't lose his footing. He just kept walking, leaving a trail of red drops on the ancient stone. "I'm sorry," Elena whispered. "I'm so sorry." They were halfway across when the worst section appeared, a place where rockslide had narrowed the trail to less than 2 feet. Prometheus would have to edge along sideways, his body pressed against the cliff, hooves right at the edge of the drop. "We can't," Elena said. "There has to be another way." But there wasn't. Behind them, the gunmen. Ahead, the impossible trail. Below, death waiting in the rocks. Prometheus turned his head to look at her, and in that moment, Elena saw something that transcended mere animal intelligence. She saw determination, understanding, and something that looked almost like reassurance. The horse positioned himself carefully and began edging along the narrowed section. Elena held her breath, making herself as small as possible, feeling every shift in Prometheus's balance. Rocks crumbled beneath his hooves, tumbling down the cliff face with a sound like rattling bones. One step, another. The wind gusted, trying to push them off the ledge. Prometheus leaned into it, compensating with a precision that shouldn't be possible. His enhanced muscle development, the genetic modifications Sterling had made, they were the only things keeping them alive. They were 3/4 through the narrow section when Elena heard a sound that stopped her heart. Helicopter rotors. The aircraft appeared around the mountain shoulder, coming in fast and low. The pilot had found them on the pass, trapped with nowhere to run. The helicopter's side door was open, and Elena saw a man with a rifle leaning out. Prometheus had nowhere to go. The narrow trail offered no room to move, no way to dodge. They were pinned against the cliff face, perfect targets. The gunman raised his rifle, and then something impossible happened. Prometheus screamed, not the whinny of a frightened horse, but something deeper, more resonant. A sound that echoed off the mountain walls and seemed to carry for miles. It was a call, Elena realized. A summons. From the valleys below came answering cries. Horses appeared on the ridges around them, wild mustangs that had no business being at this elevation, moving with coordination that wild horses shouldn't possess. They were scattered across multiple vantage points, and as the helicopter pilot tried to orient on them, more appeared. Dozens of horses, moving in patterns that looked almost deliberate, creating confusion, making it impossible for the pilot to focus on any single target. "What the hell?" Elena whispered, but she knew. These were the other test subjects, the ones who'd escaped Sterling's facility. Prometheus had called them, and they'd responded, creating a diversion that might just save her life. The helicopter swung away from the cliff face, trying to track the movements below. The gunmen fired at several of the mustangs, but they scattered with unnatural coordination. By the time the pilot reoriented on the pass, Prometheus had reached the wider section and was moving at a rapid walk, putting distance between them and the guns. The helicopter made one more pass, but dusk was falling, and the pilot seemed to decide that navigating mountain updrafts and failing light wasn't worth the risk. The aircraft banked away, heading back towards Sterling's facility. Elena sagged in the saddle, shaking with reaction. They'd survived Dead Man's Pass. Barely, impossibly, but they'd survived. Prometheus carried her off the ledge trail and into a small alpine meadow where a stream trickled through grass, turned gold by autumn. He stopped, finally showing signs of exhaustion, his head lowered, his breathing heavy. Blood still seeped from the bullet wound on his haunch. Elena dismounted on shaking legs and immediately went to examine the injury. The bullet had carved a furrow through the muscle, painful but not life-threatening. She cleaned it with water from the stream and wrapped it with strips torn from her shirt. "Thank you," she said softly, running her hand down Prometheus's neck. "You saved us. You saved me." The horse turned his head, and in the fading light, Elena saw something in his eyes that looked heartbreakingly human. Gratitude, relief, and a weariness that went beyond physical exhaustion. She made camp in the meadow, building a small fire and sharing her meager supplies with Prometheus, grain from her saddlebags, mountain grass, cool water from the stream. The wild mustangs had disappeared back into the wilderness, but Elena knew they were still out there, watching over one of their own. As full darkness fell and the stars emerged in impossible numbers, Elena pulled out her father's journal and read by firelight. There were entries she'd skipped before, and now one in particular caught her attention. I've been thinking about consciousness, about what makes us human versus animal. Dr. Chen showed me brain scans of the modified horses. The neural density in certain regions, the prefrontal cortex, the areas associated with planning and self-awareness, they're approaching human levels, maybe exceeding them in some ways. Sterling sees them as products, assets to be sold. But what if there's something else? What if we've accidentally created a new form of sentience, trapped in bodies we don't respect, used for purposes that deny their fundamental nature? What if Project Wildfire isn't a horse anymore, but a person we're enslaving? Elena looked at Prometheus, who stood nearby with his eyes half closed, resting but alert. A person enslaved. The thought sent chills down her spine. What do you want? She asked quietly. If you could choose, what would you want? Prometheus opened his eyes and looked at her. He didn't answer, couldn't answer, but Elena felt the weight of that gaze, the intelligence behind it, the awareness that transcended anything nature had intended. I'll get you free, she promised. Whatever it takes. I'll make sure everyone knows what Sterling did. And then you get to choose. Stay with me, go wild, whatever you want. But it'll be your choice. The horse moved closer and laid his head across her shoulder, a gesture of trust so profound it brought tears to Elena's eyes. They would reach Summit Peak tomorrow, if they survived the night. And then the real battle would begin, not against mercenaries and corrupt lawmen, but against a system that saw creatures like Prometheus as property rather than beings deserving of rights. But tonight, in a meadow under the stars, a woman and an impossible horse rested together, two souls bound by circumstance and survival, preparing for the final push toward truth. Dawn came cold and clear. Elena woke to find Prometheus already alert, his ears pricked toward the east. She followed his gaze and saw it, smoke rising from the valley below. Too much smoke to be a campfire. Something was burning. She pulled out Caroline's satellite phone and tried to get a signal. Nothing. Either Sterling was jamming transmissions, or the mountains were blocking reception. Summit Peak was their only option now. They set out as the sun crested the ridgeline, painting the world in shades of gold and crimson. The terrain had changed overnight, less forested, more alpine tundra and exposed rock. Beautiful and deadly. One wrong step, one moment of inattention, and the mountain would claim them. Prometheus moved with renewed purpose, despite the bullet wound in his haunch. Elena had checked it at first light, already healing, the flesh knitting together at a rate that should be impossible. Sterling's genetic modifications included accelerated cellular regeneration. The horse was literally healing while they traveled. How much of you is still horse? Elena wondered aloud. How much did they change? As if in answer, Prometheus paused at a fork in the trail and looked back at her, waiting for her decision. Not just following instinct now, but deferring to her judgment. Partnership, not servitude. Summit Peak, Elena said, pointing north. That's where we need to go. They climbed for hours, the air growing thinner, each breath an effort. The fire lookout appeared around noon, a weathered wooden structure perched on the highest point for miles, connected to civilization only by an abandoned access road and the shortwave radio equipment inside. Elena's relief lasted exactly 10 seconds. James Sterling's Mercedes was parked at the base of the lookout tower. Elena's hand moved instinctively to the pistol Caroline had given her, but she forced herself to think. Sterling wouldn't come alone, not this far from his controlled territory. This was a trap, or a final confrontation, or both. She dismounted and tied Prometheus to a pine tree, then approached on foot, the gun held low but ready. The tower door stood open, and she could hear voices inside. Don't care what it costs, Sterling was saying. I want that horse recovered intact. The genetic patents alone are worth $250 million. Lose him, and we lose everything. The girl's getting help. Another voice, Sheriff Miller. She's got evidence, documentation. If she reaches the feds. She won't. Sterling's tone was ice. We own this mountain. Every route in or out. She has nowhere left to run. Elena considered her options. She could try to sneak past, reach the radio equipment, and call for help before they noticed. Or she could confront them directly, use her father's evidence as leverage. Neither option was good. The decision was taken from her when Prometheus screamed. The sound tore through the mountain silence. That same resonant call he'd made on Dead Man's Pass, but louder, more urgent. Elena spun around to see 3 SUVs racing up the access road, each carrying armed men. They'd been waiting for her to reach the summit, where there was nowhere left to flee. Sterling emerged from the tower, Miller behind him. The tycoon's usual composure was cracked now, his face flushed with anger and something that looked like desperation. "Miss Sawyer," he called out, "this has gone far enough. Return my property, and I'll consider not pressing charges for theft and assault." "Your property murdered my father," Elena replied, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "And he's not property. Not anymore. That animal is a genetically modified organism created by my company. He is literally patented. He belongs to me the same way any invention belongs to its creator. People aren't inventions." Sterling laughed, bitter and harsh. "That thing isn't a person. It's a horse with enhanced DNA. Clever modifications, certainly, but still just livestock. Now, step away from him before someone gets hurt." The SUVs had stopped, disgorging a dozen armed men who fanned out, surrounding the summit. Elena was trapped, Prometheus was trapped, and the evidence in her pocket suddenly seemed pathetically inadequate against the force Sterling had assembled. "There's another option," Sterling continued, his tone shifting to something almost reasonable. "Your ranch is in debt. I'll pay it off. Give you 100,000 on top of that. All you have to do is forget everything you saw, everything your father documented. Walk away." "People died," Elena said. "Dr. Chun, my father. How many others? Unfortunate accidents in the course of scientific progress. But the future I'm building, enhanced animals for agriculture, for medicine, for military applications. It'll change the world. Don't throw that away for sentiment." Elena looked at Prometheus. The horse stood perfectly still, watching Sterling with those impossibly aware eyes. Not fighting his bonds, not panicking. Waiting, trusting Elena to make the right choice. She thought about her father's final journal entry, his question about consciousness and slavery. She thought about the way Prometheus had protected her, saved her, communicated with her. And she knew what Ray Sawyer would have done. "No," Elena said simply. Sterling's face hardened. "Then you've made your choice." He gestured to his men. "Take them both. Use tranquilizers if you have to, but I want that horse intact." The armed men advanced, raising their weapons. Elena pulled out her pistol, knowing it was futile. 12 against 1 were impossible odds. But she'd be damned if she went down without a fight. Prometheus shattered his reins with a single, violent pull. The rope snapped like thread, and suddenly 800 pounds of genetically enhanced fury was loose on the summit. The horse didn't run, he attacked. He charged the nearest group of mercenaries, scattering them like bowling pins. His hooves struck with precision that was almost surgical, disabling rather than killing, but leaving no doubt about his capability for violence. "Shoot him! Shoot him now!" Sterling screamed. Tranquilizer darts flew, bouncing off Prometheus's thick hide or getting tangled in his mane. The few that found purchase seemed to have no effect, his enhanced metabolism burning through the sedatives too quickly to matter. He wheeled and kicked, bit and struck, fighting with an intelligence that made trained war horses look like children's ponies. And then Elena heard it. A sound that made everyone freeze. Hoofbeats. Hundreds of them. The wild mustangs crested the ridge like a tsunami of flesh and fury. The horses Sterling had experimented on, the survivors of his death races, the ones who'd escaped into the wilderness and formed something like a herd but more organized, more purposeful. They swept across the summit in a coordinated charge that spoke of communication beyond normal equine ability. Sterling's men broke ranks, running for their vehicles as the stampede bore down on them. The SUVs roared to life, trying to flee down the access road, but the Mustangs were faster, flowing around the vehicles like water, forcing them off the narrow track. In the chaos, Elena ran for the lookout tower. She had to reach the radio, had to make contact before. A hand grabbed her arm. Sheriff Miller, his face twisted with fear and anger. "You've ruined everything, girl. Sterling promised me." Prometheus's teeth clamped down on Miller's shoulder, hauling him away from Elena with contemptuous ease. The sheriff screamed, and the horse tossed him aside like a rag doll. Elena sprinted up the tower stairs, her heart hammering. The radio equipment was ancient but functional. She grabbed the microphone, found the emergency frequency Caroline had written on the map, and transmitted blindly. This is Elena Sawyer broadcasting from Summit Peak. I have evidence of illegal genetic experimentation, murder, and corruption involving James Sterling and Sheriff Miller. I need immediate federal assistance. Repeat, this is an emergency transmission. The door burst open. Sterling stood there, a pistol in his hand, his composure completely shattered. You don't understand what you're destroying, he said, the gun shaking in his grip. This research could revolutionize everything. The modifications in Prometheus could cure diseases, enhance human performance, extend lifespans. You're throwing away the future for one animal. For one person, Elena corrected. That's what he is now, whatever you intended. You created a sentient being and enslaved him. And when that wasn't profitable enough, you killed people to keep it secret. Your father was going to ruin years of work. My father was going to stop you from playing God with living creatures. Sterling raised the gun, pointing it directly at Elena's chest. Give me the evidence. The journal, the USB drive. Now. Elena's hand moved toward her pocket, but she never reached it. Prometheus crashed through the tower window in an explosion of glass and splintering wood. He'd climbed the exterior stairs, something no normal horse could do, and now he stood between Elena and Sterling, his body a living shield. Move, Sterling commanded the horse. Move, or I'll shoot you both. Prometheus didn't move. He stood perfectly still, protecting Elena with his body, and Elena saw the calculation in Sterling's eyes. The man who'd created this magnificent, terrible thing was now faced with the consequences of his own hubris. You can't shoot him, Elena said quietly. He's worth too much to your investors. And you can't shoot me without witnesses seeing. Those SUVs you sent fleeing? They have dash cameras. The Mustangs scattered your men across the mountain. How many of them do you think are still loyal after what they've seen? Sterling's hand wavered. It's over, Elena continued. The radio transmission went out. Federal authorities will have heard it. Even if you kill me now, the evidence exists. My father made multiple copies, sent them to people you don't know about. You've lost. For a long moment, Sterling stood frozen, the gun still raised. Then his shoulders sagged, and Elena saw the exact moment when the fight went out of him. He lowered the weapon. He was the perfect specimen, Sterling said softly, looking at Prometheus. Enhanced strength, accelerated healing, near-human intelligence. The culmination of 15 years of research. And you're going to let them destroy him. I'm going to let him live free, Elena replied. The way every sentient being deserves. The sound of helicopter rotors interrupted them. But this time, they were coming from the east. Federal markings on the side, not Sterling's private aircraft. The cavalry had arrived. 3 months later, the courtroom in Helena was packed for the sentencing. James Sterling sat at the defendant's table, his expensive suit doing nothing to hide the defeat in his eyes. Sheriff Miller had already taken a plea deal, testifying against his former patron in exchange for a reduced sentence. Elena sat in the gallery, Dr. Mason on one side and Caroline on the other. The federal prosecutor, Marcus Webb, had done exactly what her father had hoped, pursued the case with relentless determination, building a mountain of evidence that made Sterling's conviction inevitable. Illegal genetic experimentation on animals. Multiple counts of conspiracy to commit murder. Racketeering. The list went on and on. Sterling would spend the rest of his life in federal prison. But the real battle had happened outside the courtroom. The genetic patents Sterling held on Prometheus and the other modified horses had been challenged in a landmark case that went all the way to emergency Supreme Court review. Could a sentient being be patented? Did genetic modification strip away the right to self-determination? The questions were unprecedented, complex, and world-changing. The court's decision had come down just yesterday. Sentient beings, regardless of their origin, could not be owned as property. Prometheus and horses like him were declared wards of the state pending further study, with full protections against exploitation or harm. It wasn't perfect. Prometheus still wasn't legally a person in the fullest sense, but it was a start, and it meant Elena could take him home. She'd used the whistleblower reward money to pay off the ranch's debts, and then some. The Sawyer Ranch was solvent again, and Elena had converted most of the grazing land into a sanctuary. Horses that had been part of Sterling's experiments, animals rescued from abuse or neglect, they all found home in the valley her father had loved. And Prometheus had a choice now. Elena visited him daily in the federal facility where he was housed during the legal proceedings. The handlers there had learned quickly that treating him like an ordinary horse was pointless. He opened his own stall, operated simple latches, and communicated his preferences with a clarity that unnerved people who'd never encountered true animal intelligence. "He's cleared for release," Dr. Mason said, pulling Elena from her thoughts. "The federal veterinarians finished their final assessment this morning. He's healthy, stable, and legally free to go where he chooses." "Where he chooses," Elena repeated softly. "What if he chooses to leave? To go back to the wild mustangs?" "Then that's his choice to make," Caroline said. "Your father would have understood that." Elena nodded. Ray Sawyer had taught her that true love for horses meant respecting their nature, their needs, their autonomy, even if it broke your heart. The facility where Prometheus was kept stood on the outskirts of Helena, a temporary arrangement until permanent homes could be found for all of Sterling's surviving test subjects. Elena signed the release paperwork with hands that shook slightly, then followed the handler to the paddock. Prometheus stood in the autumn sunshine, his coat glossy and healthy now, the scars from Dead Man's Pass healed to thin white lines. He'd gained weight, his enhanced musculature now properly developed rather than wasted by abuse and starvation. He was, quite simply, magnificent. When he saw Elena, his ears pricked forward and he walked to the fence. Not the desperate rush of a prisoner seeing freedom, but the measured approach of someone greeting a friend. "Hey boy," Elena said softly. "They tell me you're free to go. You can stay here if you want. They'll take good care of you. Or you can go to the wilderness, find the other mustangs. Or..." She pulled out a lead rope, holding it loosely in her hand. "Not a tool of control now, but an offer. Or you can come home with me. Help me run the sanctuary. Give other horses like you a chance at the life you never had." Elena's voice cracked slightly. "But it has to be your choice. I won't force you. I won't own you. You'll be a partner, if you want." Prometheus looked at the lead rope, then at Elena, then out toward the mountains visible in the distance. For a long moment, he stood perfectly still, and Elena wondered what thoughts moved through that enhanced mind. Did he understand the full implications of the choice? Did he grasp that returning with her meant accepting some limitations on his freedom? Then Prometheus lowered his head and gently took the end of the lead rope in his teeth. He carried it to Elena and placed it in her hand. Not submission, but deliberate choice. Partnership freely given. Elena felt tears streaming down her face as she clipped the rope to his halter. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, let's go home." The drive back to Silver Creek took 3 hours. Prometheus rode calmly in the trailer, and when they finally pulled up to the Sawyer Ranch, the sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the valley in shades of gold and crimson that matched the autumn leaves. Elena led Prometheus to the largest paddock, where 3 other recovered horses grazed peacefully. All of them were Sterling's former test subjects, animals whose enhanced abilities made them unsuitable for normal adoption, but who deserved safety and respect. When she unclipped the lead rope, Prometheus didn't bolt into the paddock. Instead, he stood beside her, looking out over the ranch, the repaired barn, the new fences, the clean pastures. His home now, if he chose it. "Your father would be proud," Dr. Mason said, coming to stand beside Elena. "He spent his whole life believing horses deserved better than how we treat them. You proved him right." "We proved him right," Elena corrected. "You, Caroline, everyone who helped." "And Prometheus," Caroline added. She'd driven up separately, her truck full of winter supplies for the sanctuary. "Let's not forget the horse who started it all." Elena reached out and ran her hand down Prometheus's neck, feeling the powerful muscles beneath the glossy coat. "I could never forget him. He saved my life. In more ways than one." The horse turned his head and gently pressed his forehead against her shoulder, a gesture of affection, of trust, of something that transcended the normal bonds between human and animal. They'd been through hell together, had survived impossible odds, and had emerged on the other side changed. Not owner and owned, not master and servant, but 2 sentient beings who'd chosen each other. As darkness fell over the valley and the first stars emerged, Elena stood in the paddock with Prometheus, watching the other horses settle for the night. The ranch was quiet now, peaceful in a way it hadn't been since her father's death. "I miss him," Elena said softly. "I wish he could see this. See you. See what we've built." Prometheus's ears swiveled toward her voice, listening. But I think he knew, she continued. I think he knew that someday, somehow, things would change. That people would have to recognize what you are, not property, not livestock, but a being with thoughts and feelings and rights. He just didn't live long enough to see it happen. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of pine and sage across the valley. Elena closed her eyes and let herself remember her father, his laugh, his gentle hands with frightened horses, his absolute conviction that every creature deserved dignity and respect. When she opened her eyes again, Prometheus was looking at her with an expression she could only call understanding. Maybe he couldn't speak, couldn't tell her in words that everything would be all right. But he could stand beside her, solid and warm and alive. He could choose to stay, day after day, because he wanted to. And somehow that was enough. Come on, Elena said, gathering the lead rope. Let's get you settled for the night. Tomorrow we start the real work, building something my father would be proud of. Prometheus followed her toward the barn, his hoofbeats steady on the worn path. Behind them, the other horses nickered softly, settling into their stalls. The sanctuary was small now, just 4 horses and a dream, but it would grow. Other animals would come, broken and scared and needing the safety only freedom could provide. And at the center of it all would be Prometheus, living proof that consciousness couldn't be owned, that sentience demanded respect, and that sometimes the most revolutionary act is simply recognizing another being's right to exist on their own terms. Elena paused at the barn door and looked back at the ranch one more time. The buildings were old, the fences imperfect, the operation held together with hope and determination and the last savings of a dead man who'd believed in doing the right thing even when it cost him everything. But it was home, and it was free, and it was enough. Good night, Dad, she whispered to the wind. We did it. We got the truth out. And Prometheus is safe. The wind seemed to carry her words away toward the mountains, where wild mustangs ran in the darkness. Horses enhanced by human hubris, but choosing their own path now. Living proof that nature and science could coexist if approached with respect rather than exploitation. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The sanctuary would need supplies, volunteers, funding. The legal battles over animal sentience would continue, probably for years. And Prometheus and the others would need constant care, monitoring to ensure their enhanced genetics didn't cause unexpected health problems. But tonight, Elena Sawyer stood in her father's barn with a horse who'd chosen to stay, and she felt something she hadn't experienced since the day Ray Sawyer died. Hope. The future was uncertain, the road ahead difficult, but they would face it together, human and horse, partners in a new kind of relationship that honored both their natures. Elena led Prometheus to his stall, removed his halter, and watched as he settled into the fresh straw with a contented sigh. The bullet wound on his haunch was nearly invisible now, healed to nothing but a memory. Like Elena herself, the horse bore scars from their journey, but he'd survived. Triumphed, even. Sleep well, Elena said softly. Tomorrow we change the world. One horse at a time. Prometheus's eyes were already closing, but Elena could have sworn she saw understanding in that final, sleepy gaze. Understanding and something more, gratitude, perhaps, or affection. The emotional bond between beings who'd survived the impossible together. She left the barn and walked to the ranch house, her father's home, her home now. Inside, the journal and USB drive sat on the desk where she'd left them, evidence that had changed everything, proof that one man's determination to do right could outlive his death and reshape the future. Elena made herself a simple dinner and sat on the porch, watching the stars emerge one by one over the valley. Somewhere in the darkness, wild horses ran free. Somewhere in Helena, James Sterling sat in a cell, paying for his crimes. And here, in this quiet valley in Montana, a young woman and an impossible horse were building something new from the ashes of tragedy. It wasn't the ending Elena had imagined when she bought a broken-down horse at auction 3 months ago. It was better. It was real. It was a beginning. And as the moon rose over the mountains and an owl called from the pines, Elena Sawyer smiled. Her father had taught her that horses could teach you everything you needed to know about life, about resilience, about trust, about the courage to keep going when everything seemed lost. Prometheus had taught her one more lesson, that consciousness, wherever it emerged, deserved respect. That being different didn't mean being lesser, and that sometimes the most valuable things in life came from the most unexpected places. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, all was well.